called it the top of the world. Of rugged mountain ridges, where white water carves its way through canyons. And vast open fields dissolve into pools of color and light. But the scenic splendor shares this stage with more mysterious wonders. Jets of steam and water erupt from the world's greatest concentration of geysers. It was here that the idea of a national wilderness reserve began to take shape. Yellowstone, the great American wilderness. The world's first national park. Tucked into the northwest corner of Wyoming, between Montana and Idaho, Yellowstone National Park is more than 2 million acres of sprawling virgin wilderness. To experience Yellowstone is to come to know its wildness, which has remained essentially unchanged for 8,000 years. Yellowstone is a living reminder of what our country was like before it was civilized and developed. The park offers a rare opportunity to explore and rediscover the North American wilderness. While millions of people have been through the park, it is astonishing to consider how much of Yellowstone has never felt the foot of man. But the Yellowstone story is larger than its massive wilderness. The voices of Yellowstone are startling and eloquent. They speak an unfamiliar language that we immediately understand. Nature unbridled, its power awe-inspiring and exhilarating. More than a century ago, these same voices stimulated a movement, a radical concept to protect wilderness land as no land had ever been protected before, to preserve its wildness and beauty. Henry David Thoreau asked,
"Why should we not have our national preserves, in which the bear and panther and even some of the hunted race may still exist, and not be civilized off the face of the earth? Our forests, not for idle sport or food, but for inspiration and our own true recreation."
Yellowstone is the fulfillment of that concept and was honored as the world's first national park. As such, it has become a symbol, a source of national pride. Encircled by the mountain ranges of the northern Rockies, The central basin of Yellowstone is situated on a plateau 7,500 feet high. This elevation, combined with a latitude halfway between the equator and the North Pole, brings the park long, hard winters and short, cool summers. Almost 3,500 square miles in size, Yellowstone has 5 entrances. And these entrances converge into the Park Loop Road surrounding Yellowstone's central plateau. The western side of the park is dominated by the geothermal areas. Old Faithful, Yellowstone's most popular attraction, is one of many geysers in the 3 major geyser basins in this part of the park. Near the north entrance is Mammoth Hot Springs with its delicately colored limestone pools. Dominating the southeastern portion of the park is the shimmering expanse of Yellowstone Lake. Flowing north from the lake is the Yellowstone River. The highlight of the eastern side of the park is the breathtaking Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone. And hovering above the canyon at more than 10,000 feet, Mount Washburn offers a panoramic view that encompasses most of the park. The lower elevations of the northern section of the park are covered with sagebrush and prairie grasses. This is the summer range of the pronghorn, the Yellowstone antelope. To hear some tell it, the pronghorn is born running and is the fastest animal on Earth. Though less than accurate, anyone who has seen a mature animal sprint understands the origin of these tales. Its blinding speed and keen eyesight are its primary defenses against predators. The wild animals of Yellowstone have free range of the park and are neither fed, fenced, herded, nor hunted. There are more American elk than any other large animal in the park. Yellowstone has been home for elk herds for several thousand years. The 25 to 30,000 elk eat an enormous amount of plant life, and as such do a significant amount of gardening in the park. Another of the large herbivores or plant eaters of Yellowstone is the mule deer. With an appetite for leaves and twigs and unable to cope with the deep snow, the mule deer migrate outside the park during the winter. healthy adult can weigh more than 200 pounds and can outrace a cougar. Though its natural camouflage makes it an expert at hiding. Natural camouflage is an advantage to predators as well as prey, especially to creatures that hunt at night, like the great gray owl. Although it is the largest owl in North America, the great gray owl has a noiseless, moth-like flight and is rarely seen by park visitors. Eleven varieties of trees cover 80% of the park area. But nearly 2/3 of Yellowstone is covered by a single species, the lodgepole pine. There are hundreds of lakes, ponds, rivers, and streams in the park. Yellowstone Lake is the largest body of water in the park. The Yellowstone River carves its way north out of the wild Absaroka Range. The river supports a diversity of wildlife, including the elegant trumpeter swan, one of the nation's rarest birds, as well as the cunning and resourceful coyote. Measuring as high as 6 feet from the ground at its shoulders and weighing up to 1,000 pounds or more, the moose is the world's largest mammal with antlers. During the fall mating season, the bull tends to charge anything that moves, suspicious that it might be a rival for the affection of the cows. Yellowstone in winter is a beautiful, if not numbing, experience. It is easy to see why early nomadic hunters stayed away from Yellowstone, except during the short, mild seasons. In fact, a small number of Shoshone Indians were the only people who seem to have inhabited this wilderness year-round. Bighorn sheep were an important part of the Shoshone diet, according to the reports of the early trappers and explorers. The cup-shaped hooves of the bighorn have an uncanny rock-gripping ability and make the animals particularly nimble in the rough mountain terrain and on wind-swept ridges. For men on foot, armed only with primitive weapons, the bighorn were probably the easiest large game to hunt. Indians called the bison Great Brother. The bison supplied meat for the cooking fires and hides for teepees and sleeping robes. The Shoshone made tools and weapons from bison bones, glue from the hooves, and bows from the horns. But the selective, resourceful hunting of the bison by the Indians ended in the 19th century, when the white hunters conducted what was known as the Great Big Buffalo Hunt, and in a frighteningly short period of slaughter, reduced the bison population from many millions to near extinction. The 2,500 bison now living in Yellowstone, together with a very small herd in Grand Teton National Park, are the nation's sole remaining wild bison. Today, the bison roam the park freely. And while accustomed to man, are not entirely predictable. Some weigh as much as 2,000 pounds, and these impressive beasts are strong, fast, and best studied from a distance. Legends have it that the Shoshone warriors believed if they allowed water from a geyser to spray their bodies, it would make them invisible when approaching their prey. On a practical level, the hydrothermal areas serve as warm gathering places for the animals during the long winters. As a result, the thermal areas were also hunting grounds for the Indians and helped them survive. Today, the thermal areas are the best spots to view the park wildlife during the winter.
Well, good morning. I'd like to welcome you to this special storytelling hour. My name is Judy Visti, and I work here as a naturalist, and these stories are all Native American legends. Now, as I explained a little bit earlier, when the Indians talked to each other and they didn't know the same language, lots of times they used sign language. And they also used that language, that special sign language, to talk to each other about animals. And since the stories I'm going to tell all have animals in it, I thought it would be fun for us today to do some sign language. Now, sometimes the adults don't want to cooperate, so all you kids in the front row, I want to make sure that you keep those adults doing sign language too. Okay, now I see this man back here. We're going to make sure he does it especially. Remember we learned deer? You want to practice it? You do, in my job as a naturalist, get a fair amount of positive response from visitors. And I sometimes say being a ranger is kind of like being a nun. You know, everyone is nice to you, and they let you cut into the line in the grocery store and things like that, because there's a public respect for the institution that is still intact. One of the things I see in our culture, especially like even in the last 15 years and when I was in graduate school, is that we're so careful to be scientific and analytical about animals that we don't take the opportunity to maybe learn from them, which is what the Indians did in their observations of the animals. They didn't think of the bear as a research object. They thought of it as an animal that was skilled at living, and how could they imitate it? The way the Indians could say goodbye in sign language was this: may the Great Spirit make sunrise in your hearts. Thank you very much.
Although most of the roads in the park are closed to automobiles between November 1st and May 1st, for hardy souls who can brave the cold, winter is indeed a magical time at Yellowstone. The word geyser comes from the Icelandic word meaning to gush. Yellowstone has more than 200 active geysers and thousands of hot springs. Aptly, the park has been called a huge volcanic cauldron, where a bubble of fire from deep inside the earth fuels the greatest concentration of geysers in the world. The bubbling mud, sulfurous fumes, and explosive eruptions create a scene that might be from a distant planet. As it has for at least 100 years, Old Faithful blasts its towering plume of 9,000 gallons of boiling water as high as 180 feet. An average of 73 minutes elapses between eruptions. Each lasts 2 to 5 minutes. World-renowned today, this awesome spectacle has attracted travelers to Yellowstone since 1870, when the Great Geyser was first reported to a disbelieving public. The park's geysers come in all shapes and sizes, and most erupt on a very whimsical schedule. One of the most dependable geysers is named Riverside. Located on the east bank of the Firehole River, Riverside Geyser erupts for about 20 minutes every 6.5 hours. It shoots its 75-foot column of water in a graceful arc over the river. The hot springs and pools are the most colorful of the varieties of thermal features. The largest hot pool, Grand Prismatic, is 370 feet in diameter, and it is impossible to fully appreciate its size when standing next to it. The vibrant rings of color are created by minerals and by microscopic creatures that live in the hot water. Algae and bacteria of various colors thrive at different temperatures, so that the rings of color also indicate varying heat levels, often as hot as 200 degrees. For sheer magnificence, Mammoth Hot Springs is incomparable. Thick beds of limestone lie underneath Mammoth Springs. As heat dissolves the calcium carbonate in the limestone, traces of calcium are redeposited outside in the form of terraces. Minerva Terrace is an outstanding example of the self-sculpturing patterns that can form in this environment. In all, there are about 10,000 diverse and fascinating geothermal features in the park. The question remains, how did they get here? Millions of years ago, a buildup of molten rock, or magma like this, occurred underneath the Yellowstone area. Like blisters beneath the Earth's skin, these pockets of magma, lying only a few miles below the surface but extending 200 miles deep, exerted tremendous pressure on the Earth's crust, stretching it thin. The magma broke through in 3 massive volcanic eruptions over the last 2 million years. The most recent eruption, 600,000 years ago, may have been one of the greatest explosions the Earth has ever known. More than 1,000 square miles of the Rocky Mountains exploded upward. This eruption was responsible for the landscape we see today. Hollowed by the spewing lava, the remaining crust caved in and created a vast volcanic crater, or caldera, derived from the Spanish word for cauldron. Over the next 500,000 years, lava flows filled the caldera and gradually solidified into the rock found over much of the park today. Obsidian Cliff in the northwestern part of the park is a rare example of lava that crystallized in a very pure state, forming a natural glass. On Specimen Ridge in northern Yellowstone, petrified forests stand as a legacy of the volcanic activity. The fiery eruptions stripped away leaves, branches, and bark, but amazingly, some of the trees did not burn. The volcanic ash, cinders, and mud flows that totally engulfed the trees cut off the oxygen the fire needed in order to burn the wood. Over thousands of years, minerals from the surrounding rock replaced the living tissue of the buried trees cell by cell. The trees had made that rare transformation from organic matter to solid stone. The source of the unusual geological features of Yellowstone is implicit in the word hydrothermal, meaning water and heat. Rain and melted snow seep down into the earth through weaknesses in the earth's crust, called faults. The molten rock, or magma, beneath the earth's surface heats this water. Because of its abundant precipitation and the large accumulation of magma near the surface, Yellowstone has the world's largest collection of hydrothermal features. The differences between the thermal features are the result of the different systems of plumbing, how the water gets to the heat and back again. In the plumbing system of the geyser, water collects in pockets and is superheated, but the weight and pressure of the water above it raises the boiling point. Eventually, the water reaches a boil, forcing some of the overlying water up and out. This action reduces the pressure, the superheated water vaporizes, and a tremendous volume of steam forces water out of the vent in an explosive eruption. In the plumbing system of hot springs, the water circulates freely enough so that no superheating occurs, and the water, often as hot as 200 degrees, emerges at the surface. A fumarole is similar to a hot spring with very little water. The smaller amount of water is converted to steam instantly and expelled from the vent. A mud pot is simply a fumarole with steam that contains acid gases. The gases decompose rocks into clay and mud. A mud pot forms on top of this type of fumarole. In addition to the powerful volcanic forces that formed this park, the land has been shaped by the erosive force of water and ice. Over the past 300,000 years, Yellowstone has been glaciated at least 3 times. The glaciers flowed through the park, remodeling it in their slow, almost whimsical fashion. thinning and sharpening mountains by plucking boulders away from bedrock, and then using these giant stones to scrape the floors and walls of valleys, rounding them and broadening them in the process. As they slowly receded, the mountains of ice melted to fill in the Yellowstone Lake depression. And sand and silt were left across broad areas of the park. Of all the forces of nature, running water is the most erosive. And Yellowstone's many mountain streams and rivers have cut a network of valleys and canyons across the park. The most dramatic example is the work of the Yellowstone River at the point where it plunges 109 feet over the upper falls. A half-mile farther down, the thundering river approaches the lower falls. Drops 308 feet, greater than that of Niagara, and enters the awesome Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone. "26 miles long, the canyon alone would be reason enough for a park." Extraordinary vistas of the canyon can be seen from vantage places at Inspiration Point and Artist Point. Of the canyon walls are not merely solar sleight of hand. The volcanic canyon rock has been chemically altered by the minerals in the steam and hot water. From the earliest recorded visits, the canyon left a deep impression on explorers who happened upon it. In fact, the Lewis and Clark expedition of 1805 passed north of the Yellowstone country, since they had heard little about the natural wonders of the region. On their way home, however, John Coulter, a member of the expedition, did obtain permission to leave the party to explore and establish trade relations with new groups of Indians. In the fall of 1807, Coulter became the first known white man to set foot inside what we today call Yellowstone. By 1837, tales of his adventures were widespread, and the novelist Washington Irving wrote about Coulter's description of gloomy terrors, its hidden fires, smoking pits, noxious steams, and the all-pervading smell of brimstone. The area became known among trappers as Coulter's Hell. For years, Yellowstone was the domain of fur trappers, and stories about its wonders continued to circulate as the tall tales of mountain men, too fantastic to believe. Colorful trappers such as Jim Bridger often improved upon the truth.
Yes, sirree. There's miles of petrified hills covered with layers of petrified trees, and on them trees are petrified birds a-singing petrified songs.
Everyone knew that these men were different, strange, and their work was rugged and dangerous in the extreme. But in 1840, the fur trade collapsed when silk hats became the fashion and the beaver hat went out of style. Through the end of the Civil War, the only white men the Indians saw were prospectors in futile search of gold. Between 1869 and 1872, several parties of explorers set out to finally confirm or deny the rumors about Yellowstone's thermal features. The best known of these was the Washburn-Langford-Doane expedition of 1870. For more than a month, the 19 men in the expedition systematically explored the area, keeping careful records of their journey.
These 19 spirited men took a real good look at the Yellowstone country. They traversed it and saw what they considered to be were the greatest natural wonders on the continent. Among those things that were most special to them were Tower Falls because of its beauty, and Mud Volcano, which in the 1870s was throwing mud 300 feet up into the air. The size and height of Yellowstone Lake was astounding to them. And then finally, toward the end of their journey, they came upon the greatest collection of geysers in the world there at Old Faithful, and they even gave the name to Old Faithful. It was at a campfire not too far from here, just before they were leaving the Yellowstone country, that they had some discussions about what they were going to do as the expedition broke up. And one man suggested that they apply to the Wyoming Territory for the rights to divide up the land they had looked at so that they could benefit monetarily from it. But it was at this time that, according to Nathaniel Langford's diary, that a Montana attorney by the name of Cornelius Hedges made a stunning alternative suggestion. He didn't think that it was appropriate for any private individual to own part of that region. He felt it would be better if the public could come into this region and enjoy it just as their group had in the last 20 or 30 days. And his suggestion was so popular amongst the group that they dedicated themselves to that objective as they left the park area. And some of the things they did were to publish their journals in magazines and newspapers. And Nathaniel Langford even went on public speaking dates around the country to talk about the Yellowstone adventure. It was at one of these speaking engagements where Ferdinand Hayden happened to attend. He was at that time working for the U.S. Geological Survey for the United States government. Hayden became inspired about the Yellowstone country and was able to get enough money together from the government to lead his own scientific exploration here the following summer. And so in just a matter of 2 years with Washburn, Langford, and Doane, and then the Hayden survey, plenty of evidence was available that Yellowstone's wonders were tremendous. And politicians got interested in the national park idea. And a man named William Claggett, a newly elected delegate from the Montana Territory, took the idea and wrote it up as a bill, introduced it, and within about 6 months of its introduction, Ulysses S. Grant signed the Yellowstone Park Bill. And we had the world's first national park, Yellowstone.
Administered jointly by the Department of War and the Department of the Interior, cavalry units were brought in to protect the park from abuse and exploitation. And Army engineers began building roads to make the park accessible to the people. In 1916, the National Park Service was created and soon after took on the administration of Yellowstone. The National Park Service has a mandate to preserve the natural wonders within park boundaries in an undisturbed state and make them available for the enjoyment of all. Today, more than 2.5 million people visit the park every year. Here, the bear that walks like a man, the awe-inspiring grizzly, is king. Park rangers will tell you that you are more likely to be struck by lightning than to be attacked by a grizzly, but they warn you to be cautious. The grizzly is the strongest and most ferocious mammal in North America. The great grizzlies can grow to 1,000 pounds and stand more than 9 feet tall. There are about 200 grizzlies in the park, and about 500 black bears, the smaller and less ferocious cousin of the grizzly. It is against the law to feed bears, and park regulations require people to keep a respectful distance. Barbara Pettinga is a naturalist and ranger who regularly leads interpretive walks through grizzly country.
Yeah, this is a back foot because you can see the whole pad of the foot, all right?
This is the back claws way out.
Okay, now in this one right here, it looks like we got claws way out in the front.
Yeah.
3 summers ago, my husband Bob and I were mauled by a grizzly here in the park, and it happened in an area somewhat similar to this, but it was north of here. And what we had done was hike through a lodgepole stand that was on a fairly steep incline, and we walked up over it. When we got to the edge of it, we were walking into a very, very strong wind. And immediately when we got out in the open, I looked off to the right and could see a bison carcass lying down in a sort of a drainage ditch, just diagonally off to my right. And when we saw that, we both knew that it was not a particularly good place to be, and immediately made the decision to leave. And we stood there long enough at the edge of the trees just so that I could get out my binoculars and look at the bison to see if it had been fed on. In the meantime, Bob looked off to the right, and he saw a grizzly female raise her head. And she was, it turned out later, she was exactly 81 feet away from us. Now, what do you do in a situation like that? It's very, very frightening. Well, he saw the grizzly, and he yelled at me. I had my back turned to him. I was about 4 paces ahead of him. And he yelled, "Barb, Barb, look out." And I turned around, and in just that length of time, the bear had rolled onto her feet and was charging. And I'm sure you have to understand that it's a terrifying thing to see. And you have to make a decision as to what to do. And I had the benefit of Park Service training, so I knew that I shouldn't turn my back, shouldn't try to run from the bear. So I stood my ground, and I was the person that the bear came after initially. And I backed off maybe 2 or 3 paces before the bear got to me. Now my hope was that by standing and facing her, that she would stop before she got to me. She didn't. She grabbed my left thigh right here, and I was thrown down, and the bear was immediately on my back, and I could feel her moving around. Initially, I was making some noise. I was struggling. Very quickly, I realized that my best bet was to play dead, which I did. And when I did that, the bear left me. In the meantime, Bob had remained pretty much where he was, and she ran toward him. Well, she actually charged him. He was standing right near a broken over tree that had snapped off about this far above the ground. And when the bear came at him, he was able to sidestep behind it. He ducked away from her. She grazed his shoulder. She actually ripped his clothing and just bruised his flesh slightly. And he went into an approximation of what we call the cannonball position. And the bears, at that point, bit him above the knee, and then she left him and she ran up slope. When she got to the top of the slope, she turned around and she came racing back down again. And this time she went right over the top of Bob and then came back out at me. In the meantime, neither one of us had moved at all. When she got to me, she stood just downhill from me and she hooked her claws under my uphill side and pulled me onto my back. And I didn't move. I kept my eyes closed. I don't think I breathed. And the momentum was such that I could use it to get myself face down again. And she did that 3 times. And then she seemed to be satisfied that we were no longer a threat. And she left. Now, what I forgot to tell you in the beginning of the story was that she had 2 cubs with her. So the situation was an extremely loaded situation. We surprised a female bear with cubs who was defending a carcass. Any one of those 3 ingredients would have been enough in and of itself at that close range to trigger an attack. So we were lucky, I guess, in the sense that we encountered all 3 really risky situations in grizzly country, and we came out of it very, very well.
It has been said that a trip to Yellowstone National Park is the most eloquent and compelling argument that can possibly be made for the conservation movement. Yellowstone puts us on intimate terms with the ancient elemental forces of nature. And gives us a glimpse of their overwhelming power and violent potential. Here you can walk by a sea of boiling mud. And feel the spray of an eruption emanating from the belly of our planet. Here you can explore the wilderness where animals are in natural relationships with each other and with the land. The geological miracles that convinced the government to establish Yellowstone as a national park more than 100 years ago are still here today in all of their glory. It is our great fortune that the early explorers of this park were so moved by the grandeur of Yellowstone that they acted to protect it and make it a national trust and heritage for the American people. A member of the original Washburn expedition of 1870 observed,
"It was like the fairest dream which ever came to bless the slumbers of a child. How still it was. What silence reigned. How lovingly it laid its hush upon you.